Hello, everyone. The message that I'm talking about today has a call to action, and the call to action is that Jesus is coming, and our call is to be ready. Those two words are pointed at all of us. Believers, unbelievers, be ready. Earlier in chapter 24 and 25 of Matthew, the disciples were asking Jesus about when he was going to come. And of course, he said the signs are coming. There are no specific signs, but that we need to be ready. And he expressed that with the parable of the 10 virgins and the talents, if you remember, to invest, and some people did not invest and they were not good stewards. Some virgins did not have the oil, so they could not see the bridegroom. They could not get in. In essence, they couldn't go into heaven because they weren't ready. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament include judgment. Both talk of temporal judgment or judgment about what's going to happen right now, and people lose their lives or have misfortunes and things like that. And there's judgment. But the New Testament, most of the time, talks about eternal judgment. Like not just losing your life as a judgment, but losing your soul. Not one person spoke about judgment more than Jesus did. So let's read along with me. Or you can turn to Matthew chapter 25. We're going to start in verse 31. And so there's quite a bit here, and then I'm going to discuss what I believe the Lord meant for us to take from this. Verse 31, chapter 25 of Matthew. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people, one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you as a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison?" And then Jesus says, now he's using the term for himself now, "and the King will answer them. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers," pointing to the believers, the disciples, "you did it to me." Then he will say to those on the left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, you did not visit me." Then they will also answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these," remember pointing to the disciples, "you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So the New Testament focuses a tremendous amount and emphasis on judgment. And it isn't just the Acts or epistles or Revelation, it's in the Gospels. Because no one said more about judgment than Jesus did. He taught about it over and over. He spoke of sins that wouldn't be forgiven. He spoke of the danger of losing one's soul forever. He spoke of perdition. He spoke of destruction. He spoke of hell, of fire, of wailing and weeping and gnashing of teeth, of outer darkness and torment. The awesomeness of facing eternity apart from salvation. His words are intense, they are inescapable, and they're dramatic. I remember reading about Jonathan Edwards in 1741, who gave probably the most effective sermon, and it caused many people to come and believe. The title of that sermon was Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So we're not surprised when we come to Matthew 25 that the climax of his sermon on second coming is has a warning about judgment. In verse 41 he says, "Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the angels, devil and his angels." And someone might say, well, I thought Jesus was a person who shared love with everyone. I thought Jesus was the kind that did good, and all of this about everlasting fire and cursing, it doesn't make sense. And then again in verse 46 about everlasting punishment. Well, warning comes out of love. Love warns people. I mean, if there is something to avoid, it is loving to warn someone to avoid it. It is not loving not to warn them. Example, if you had a neighbor that was very kind to you and very nice all the time and used wonderful language and seemed to be very nice, but when he was in your house, he noticed there was a wire that was about to start a fire. And he was nice and he just left you and he never said anything about it. Would he love you if he didn't warn you? What if your house started catching on fire and he was the one that saw it in the back of the house and you were out in the front of the house and he didn't warn you? Well, that's just not love. I wouldn't call him very loving. So we should not say Jesus was just a person who shared great love if he didn't warn us about what could happen to us eternally. It is love that warns. So the fact that he gave so many judgments and warnings does not minimize it, but it maximizes his love. There's no harshness in him. There's no coldness. There's no unfeeling attitude towards the destiny of men, but over and over and over against warning against unbelief, a warning against judgment. And so wherever you are in the New Testament, you feel this constant pressure of judgment. It is a focus that comes again and again, that men might be drawn to salvation, not only by the attractiveness of salvation's benefits or salvation today in this life, but by the horrors of the alternative, the judgment. Let's look at the process. How did Jesus decide which one would be on his right and which one would be on his left? Well, we'll notice verse 32. It says, all the nations are gathered, all the peoples are gathered, everyone from everywhere, all over the earth that's still alive is brought into Jerusalem, and he separates one from another. He separates them into two groups, analogous to a shepherd dividing the sheep from the goats. Shepherds do that in the land. When we were in Israel, we noticed shepherds and their sheep and their goats. You see mixed herds of sheep and goats all over the hillsides. shepherds divide them. They divide them very often for feeding, and they divide them for resting. They move them together and then they separate them. And that is important because sheep and goats do not feed well together and they don't rest well together. And the reason being is that sheep are basically docile, gentle and easily led. The goats are unruly and rambunctious, almost fearless. And so the separation needs to be made. And in the same way the shepherd would sort his sheep from the goats, so the Lord Jesus Christ in his coming, his second coming, will separate believers from unbelievers. Believers to be taken into his kingdom, to join the glorified saints of the Old Testament, tribulation, and the church, who are going to be there in glorified form with new bodies, fit for the earth and heaven. He's going to take those who are living, who are represented here as sheep, into his kingdom. The goats will be put out of his kingdom. What's the right hand and the left hand mean when he refers to this? Notice in verse 33 we see the analogy taken a step further. He shall set the sheep on his right hand, the goats on his left. Now this tells us there's something going on right away. The right hand is the hand of blessing. The right hand is the hand of honor. The right hand is the hand of inheritance. That is the preferred hand. The sheep here are preferred in the analogy on the right hand. They are submissive, they are gentle, they are docile. The goats are unruly and rough and rugged. And they represent those who are not blessed by God. There could be many illustrations of it in the Old Testament, but remember when Jacob set out to bless his grandsons. His son Joseph had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And when Jacob set out to pronounce the blessing on those sons, he was very cautious on which son he placed in his right hand, because that very simple act of placing his right hand on that young man indicated that he was the heir, that he was the child of inheritance, that he was in the line of blessing. And so remember that he crossed his hands in order to be sure that he got his right hand on Ephraim, because the setting of the right hand symbolized blessing and inheritance. And that's what you have here. The sheep, docile, easily led, responsive, needing to be cared for sheep, represents the saints. And they are put on the right hand, the place of blessing. Notice, and I mentioned it as we were reading through, earlier in that reading, Jesus refers to himself, as he usually does, the Son of Man. It's a humble address of him. But later on, he addresses himself as the King. Then the King shall say unto them. And this fits Matthew's emphasis, because Matthew wrote to the Jews and he had them see Jesus as the King. They would understand that. He is now coming back to his kingdom. He has called himself Son of Man in verse 31, back in chapter 24, verse 30, twice the Son of Man, a term of humiliation. But now Jesus calls himself King. And he says, come to my right side. And the Greek and Roman sources, the good people in any kind of judication, any kind of trial situation, always went to the right side of the judge. So this fits that pattern. Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the earth. It's so important that we understand this. He is inviting them into the kingdom. On what terms? So that would be the next question. Many people have sort of difficulty with this passage because he says, You fed me when I was hungry, you gave me water, and so forth. And some people think that maybe he's teaching salvation by works. It's what you do. So if you want to be saved, go out and start doing good things to people. He's not saying that you're going to come into the kingdom because you're philanthropic or because you know human kindness or social action or social orientation. That's far more to it than that. People who get confused here somehow miss verse 34, because verse 34 makes it very clear on the basis of their entrance into the kingdom. You see, the people on his right are people that were already born into the family. They were already his. First of all, he says, "Come, ye blessed of my Father." And that emphasizes the source of their salvation. You are blessed of my Father. You are entering into the kingdom because my Father has determined to bless you. Here you have the sovereign grace beautifully expressed. By the way, the phrase in the King James Authorized Version is, you blessed of my Father. Now, you people who are blessed of my Father. You are coming into my kingdom because God determined sovereignly to bless you. He redeemed you out of his sovereign love. So verse 34 expresses the reality of redemption and salvation and justification. In other words, these people were in the kingdom. These people had believed. These people, their hearts were opened by Christ. And then it says, "Come, you who are blessed, who belong to my Father, inherit," which implies something important. You inherit something because you're born into a family. You usually don't inherit something from somebody else's family. It's from your family. It implies that they belong to the family of God, to which you also belong by faith. You inherit what is yours because by faith you've become a joint heir with Christ. And we can sort of borrow Paul's thought in Romans 8. So you are elect by sovereign grace, chosen to be blessed by the Father, and you are those who inherit because you belong to the family of faith. You are sons of God. And so you see the source of salvation, and you see the gift of salvation given to those who are children of God. It is God's work. It is not our work. He says, inherit the kingdom prepared for you. And that again emphasizes the selectivity of salvation. When God prepared the kingdom, it was for you, and he prepared it. You were chosen, you were ordained to this. You are those whom the Father designed to love. So you have the source of salvation in the Father's blessing, his desire to bless. You have the reception of salvation in the faith that brings you into the inheritance. You have the selectivity of salvation in the fact that the kingdom was prepared for those people. Let me tell you something. Whoever it was prepared for are going into it. God isn't going to lose any. You remember when Jesus says, I won't lose any that the Father has given me. Well, he's prepared his kingdom for us. It was prepared, in fact, from the foundation of the world. That emphasizes the eternal covenant that God made with himself to redeem a people selected before the foundation of the world. Who are these people that are going in? They're not just people who get involved in social action. They're not just people who do good deeds on the earth, for many people do. These are those chosen from the foundation by sovereign God to receive his grace and be blessed, and who responded by faith and became his heirs into the family. And all of that salvation richness is compacted in verse 34. The good deeds mentioned in 35 and verse 36 are not the primary emphasis of this part of Scripture. The primary emphasis is identifying these people in verses 34. The good deeds are the fruit of the redemption defined for us in such simple yet profound terms. Look at what it says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who accordingly to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you. In other words, the emphasis again in 1 Peter is that God did it. God blessed, by his mercy, chose us, gave us an inheritance, and that's why we're redeemed, and that's essentially what verse 34 is saying. The real fact of salvation is in verse 34. The proof of verse 34 is in verses 35 and 36, in the outward manifestation. Now, being a Christian is not supposed to be a secretive process. The Lord wants this not to be secret. He isn't saying, come into my kingdom because you know, and I know, that you're Christians, even though nobody else knows. He is saying, you come into my kingdom because you're the chosen, and it's obvious that you're the chosen because this is how you have lived. This is what you've done for me because you've done it for the least of these. Just the mark of salvation is always the same. It is manifest righteousness. And in this case, it is manifest righteousness revealed in one area, that is love. You know a Christian by his love. Verse 35, I was hungry. Here's the reason. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. You cared for me. You loved me. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked or ill-clad or improperly clothed, and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came unto me. 6 things are mentioned: hunger, thirst, being a stranger, improper clothing, sickness, and imprisonment. And he says, I know you belong to the kingdom. Why? Because you met all those needs in my case. You ministered to me in all of those areas. You did. You ministered to me. You loved me. Those were things they needed in that day. That list that you have is not an exhaustive list, and it's not to be seen as the only things. It's an example. In our day, it is very likely that there are different kind of needs. You know, if you're a believer and you read the Bible and you say, okay, somebody needs a drink of water, or somebody needs food, and you start giving them food, and that's not really what they needed. They need help emotionally because something went on in their lives. They need a friend. There are a lot of different types of needs that people have, and it's for us to be sensitive of those needs. Now, some of them exist in our day that we just read about, but a lot of them are other than that. Anxieties, fear, other things that they need your help with. He says, my brethren. He says, and the king shall answer and say to them, which he addressed as my brethren, verily, I say unto you, inasmuch as you've done it for the least of these, my brethren, you have done it for me. Who are his brethren? Well, Hebrews 2 and 12 says he's not ashamed to call us who believe his brethren. I believe he's referring to the redeemed people. Of course, he told us to love your neighbor, and could be anyone. Matthew 18, remember when you receive one such little child, he said, when you receive one such little child in my name, you receive me. And he means not they're a little physical child, but a spiritual child. When you receive another believer and you open your arms and you meet their need and you embrace them and you take them in and you strengthen them and you encourage them, or you help them or whatever, you accept them. You do it to Christ. Whatever you do to another believer, you do to Christ. Remember John 13 and verse 35. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples. What is that? That you love one another. Basically, saved people, redeemed people, righteous people, people who belong to the Father, manifest their Father's characteristics, which is to love. And even Jesus on earth, he didn't just do one thing and boast about it or anything. He helped people along his way. When he went from Jerusalem all the way down to Judea, along the way, he was healing people and helping people, driving out demons, all of those things. Even the Great Commission, it says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all people." Well, the literal way to look at that is, therefore, as you go, which means every day of our lives, we're to be sensitive to the needs of others. And those who are Christians are usually closer around you and you see their need. And that's what Jesus is talking about. But we live in an utter indulgent society these days. The kids are bombarded with indulgences so that everything is consumed by the eye and the ego. And we lose touch with the fact that we ought to be giving ourselves away. Service rendered to another Christian is a mark of a Christian. And service rendered to another Christian is an act towards Christ. And that's an act towards God. And that's proof of your salvation. I'd like to give you 7 lessons that I believe we can take from the scriptures that I read and talked about today. Let's look at them. Number 1, judgment is as sure as death and taxes. And the title of this lesson is Be Ready. Be ready. 2, being born again into his family. All begins and ends with God. God initiated it. We didn't call God, God called us. Number 3, in his sovereign grace, we are chosen and blessed by the Father. Again, we don't choose him, he chose us. Number 4, we are not to keep our faith a secret. We are to be humble. We don't broadcast anything that we do important for someone else, but we don't keep it a secret. What we do, that's how people know we're Christians. That's how people know there's a difference between maybe who we were and who we are today. Number 5, when we open our arms to the brethren, we open our arms to God. Very clear. Number 6, we must be sensitive to the needs of others. I remember someone was doing a little exercise and they were walking down Broadway and they threw a bunch of coins to the ground with all the noise and everything going on. And that person turned around immediately because he recognized the sound of money, because he was sensitive to that sound. In the same way, we're to be sensitive to people that have needs. We're to look deep into them and to try to help them as we can. We don't want to be pushy, but we want to be there to help. Number 7, we live to be godly blessings to others. That's why we live, to be blessings to others. And that way, we love others and we love God. Thank you and God bless.